Thank you again, UC Health, for being one of our important gold sponsors. We'll now move on to a topic of real importance to the NCLA, and you've heard a lot from us on this issue, and that is transportation, and a conversation around the federal and state infrastructure spending, on the North I-25. As many of you know, the NCLA has been a leader on advocating for increased funding for all of Colorado in the transportation sector, whether it's from the general fund, from various public finance options, or from new sources of revenue. This last year has afforded the entire state additional resources coming out of the federal government, as well as through the passage of Senate Bill 260, of which we were fully engaged and have been engaged. We're thrilled to be joined today by Shoshana Liu, Executive Director of Cdot, and Congressman Joe Neguse to discuss the various sources of revenue and different issues that are unfolding around that. With respect to 260, of course, unfolding at present is the regulatory discussion on the environmental mitigation provisions of that, and we'll talk a little bit further about that with Director Liu. But to start, we're going to start with a video from Congressman Neguse. Unfortunately, his committee schedule made it impossible for him to join us this morning. And so he did record a video for us to provide an update at the federal level. And he, of course, as many of you know, is the congressman from the 2nd Congressional District. He has grown in his leadership role and ranking in Congress, and we're grateful to have his leadership working on our behalf. So let's start with that video.
Hi, everybody. Joe Neguse here. I have the privilege and honor of representing Northern Colorado in the United States Congress as part of Colorado's 2nd Congressional District. And I am so honored to join you for NCLA's Regional Issues Summit. Grateful for the opportunity to provide an update on our work in Congress. I'm sorry that I couldn't be there live in real time, but nonetheless, I'm so delighted to be able to provide you with this virtual update from Washington, D.C. As I'm sure you all know, we have just wrapped up an incredibly busy and productive few weeks in Washington, culminating with the passage of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which was signed into law by the president just 2 weeks ago, and the Build Back Better Act out of the House. Together, these two bills will provide transformational investments in Northern Colorado to rebuild crumbling roads and bridges like I-25, to expand clean energy and EV infrastructure, to restore our forests and cut taxes and lower costs for working families. The bipartisan infrastructure bill in particular will help us repair so many roads and bridges that we have been working on for the better part of the last 50 years. It is the single largest dedicated bridge investment since the construction of the interstate highway system itself. It will invest in public transit and rail, expands broadband throughout Larimer County, Grand County, Summit County, and across our wonderful state, and also includes key priorities for the West, which we've been advocating for, such as expanding broadband, securing clean water for our children, funds for wildfire prevention, a pay raise for our federal wildland firefighters, investments in collaborative forest programs that have worked in places like Larimer County, and an upgrade to our power grid to ensure that it is safe and resilient to climate-fueled weather events. Personally important to me, the Joint Chiefs Landscape Restoration Program, a critical program that helped hold off the advance of the Cameron Peak Fire back in 2020, will be formally authorized through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Bill. It's a piece of legislation that myself and Senator Bennett have been leading on for quite some time. In addition, the Build Back Better Act, which, as I mentioned, we've now passed through the House and are waiting for the Senate to consider, is really the second part of the president's agenda and will deliver incredible investments for Colorado families, including cutting taxes for over 1 million Colorado working families, lowering the cost of healthcare, childcare, prescription drugs, and much more. These critical investments are once in a generation, and they will bring a big boost for Colorado's families and our economy. And as our Northern Colorado communities experience unprecedented growth and small businesses work to thrive and expand, these investments in transportation, in infrastructure, and in families will prove, again, transformational. So I look forward to working with all of you as we now implement the bipartisan infrastructure bill. You'll certainly have an advocate with me and in me to the state and our partners there as we work to ensure that Northern Colorado highway and rail and transit projects receive the funding that they deserve. And we're committed to doing everything we need to do to make that happen. Again, I appreciate the opportunity to share some more information about these bills, and certainly look forward to continuing to partner as we work together to better our communities and to build a brighter future. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you, Congressman Neguse. We so appreciate, again, your leadership, and you're providing some important insight to the work that's unfolding at the federal level and has important benefit to Colorado. Really appreciate that. We'll now move to Shoshana Liu, who is the Executive Director of Cdot and someone who I've grown to really admire, respect the great work she's doing, and to work with her has been a real pleasure. She was appointed, of course, upon Governor Polis's inauguration to the state, and really appreciate her joining us today to share her insights with respect to state funding, the utilization of the federal funds, and North I-25. We have a lot of work yet to do on North I-25, about $600 million short of ensuring that we have an entire express lane moving from north to south. And so, again, appreciate her joining us today, sharing some insights, and then we'll have a little dialogue. Thank you, Shoshana, so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me, Sandra. Well, good morning, everybody, and really a pleasure to have the opportunity to do this virtually. Always a great chance to chat about priorities in Northern Colorado. You know, for all the tumult of the last 21 months, the progress we've made in the last year on transportation and infrastructure is really remarkable, right? After decades of inaction, you know, at all levels of government, really turning Infrastructure Week into a national joke instead of a policy priority. It's sometimes hard to sort of look back at a year where there's been a lot of change and really see how much we've moved the needle, you know, both in the big picture in terms of the conversation about funding, but also seeing the progress on specific projects as they come to fruition at the end of construction season. You know, and no, it's not the part of I-25 that's of the greatest significance to this group, but, you know, standing at the gap, you know, in the last few weeks and looking at just how much progress has been done on a big project, you know, is a reminder that we start these things and then they eventually get finished and you get to see the impacts and the benefits that they have for people in the traveling public. And, you know, we've had interim milestones on the I-25 North project like that too. And it's just a reminder that, you know, these things that we see as traffic management projects while they're happening, you know, when they're finished, can be transformative for the public. You know, thanks to the transportation modernization that the state legislature passed this spring with SB 260, and the federal infrastructure bill that was just signed into law, Colorado is in a really strong position to meet our state's growing needs and get our 10-year plan done. The need for these reforms and investments has been made so clear by many projects, including the struggle that's underway on North I-25 to do the work that we need. You know, with funding scarce in the past, the original plans, as many of you remember all too well, for North I-25 contemplated massive amounts of throwaway work, you know, that would have only served a fraction of the useful life before requiring rebuilding. You know, this would have prolonged construction disruptions for many years while also compounding the need for funding problems across the state, and, you know, just would have created a lot of headache and inefficiency. You know, so thanks to the sound and equitable planning and the commitment to seeing this project through to its final specifications, you know, we're now working to complete that job on I-25 North in a sustainable manner at the full template. And, you know, that was really thanks to the advocacy of a lot of the people in this virtual room. And, you know, you all remember how hard that was. But I think that juxtaposition between what would have happened and what did happen, you know, because of the ability to have, you know, a plan in place and a, you know, interim steps towards and eventually a reliable funding stream really shows why this makes a difference. You know, with additional new resources entrusted to us by the state legislature and our federal partners, you know, we do have that certainty in future funding now that we have not had for such a long time. And, you know, it will allow us to get our 10-year plan done and then to move on to the next sort of class of priority projects in perpetuity. And, you know, as you all know, the 10-year plan includes segment 5 of I-25 North, as well as the safety fixes that are needed on 84th to 104th, you know, which again is a place where the asset that we have now was built in a manner, you know, that was not to its final configuration when it was built because there was funding uncertainty at the time. So it's another example of a place where had there been more certainty, they probably would have built it differently in the first place when they put that toll into action. This leaves us in a good position towards being strategic as we look ahead to the next years and decades, and puts us really ahead of where a lot of the country is in this space. I don't think it's an accident that we got our bill done before the nation did. And when I think about the coalitions that came together in the dialogue around Senate Bill 260, it brought together a much more kind of consensus and policy-driven process, I think, than we tend to see at the national level. And I think a lot of Colorado fingerprints are in that national bill. Just one small example, they have a program in there that looks an awful lot like the Main Street program that we initiated out of sort of the needs of COVID, and that's been wildly popular in every corner of the state. I think we are really seen as a space where we get things done and are getting our projects done. As we work to complete the initial 10-year list and then develop the next set of prioritized projects, and this is something that the Transportation Commission will be working on over the coming months, the same principles will persist that brought us to the list that we have now. Maintaining the good faith that communities across Colorado have shown, and really the need to make sure that we have a balanced plan that considers the very different regions of our state, including the urban areas on the Front Range and the vast network of rural roads, many of which had not gotten their due for many, many, many years, and where we're slowly but surely making a dent in it through the 10-year plan. And we've fixed hundreds of miles of these over the past couple of years. As the Transportation Commission considers the completion of the proposed pollution reduction planning standards that Sandra mentioned, and I'm sure we'll talk about in the Q&A, we're also looking to work alongside NPOs and other local partners to make sure that this quickly translates into showing how we do projects in ways that do meet these standards. I know that there's a lot of consternation in some areas about what this will look like in the real world. We're committed to very quickly, once the commission takes its action in December, moving towards getting projects done in a way that shows what success looks like. And, success like building, the multimodal options into the I-25 North projects that are underway right now, the types of work that we're doing on Floyd Hill to make sure that as we do the highway widening project, which we are moving forward with procurement on right now, it includes options so that people have more choices, and taking kind of an abstract conversation and moving it quickly, towards the pragmatic work that we do every day of getting projects done. Northern Colorado has been exemplary in showing the potential demand for multimodal options. Cdot's Mustang service has boomed through this corridor for years. It's one of the places where we see what success looks like. And, those hubs that we're building along I-25, you can see how the development around them is preparing to make good use of those assets just as soon as they're available. We're so excited to see, how these improvements benefit travel over the next few years, and really, make sure that multiple options are available to people day to day as they go about the, many needs that we have in the transportation network for both people and goods. All of this combines for an exciting time ahead. And, we're really pleased to be able to implement amazing work that our state legislature did last year, which again, I think put us ahead of a lot of the country in terms of thinking towards a transportation future. Can move on now to the discussion.
Perfect. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Shoshana. Appreciate that. There's a lot to unpack. There's so much happening on the transportation front, and really appreciate your insights and sharing here. Congress, tying the federal piece in with the I-25 discussion and the work that you all are doing to spend the resources. Congressman Neguse, of course, mentioned the opportunity for I-25 coming out of the federal funds. One of the places that the NCLA has been advocating is highlighting the fact that the North I-25 corridor is a interstate, a federal interstate system. And it seems appropriate that a tie-in to the federal funds that are forthcoming to the state be directed to interstates, not only to the north segment of I-25, but across the state. Your thoughts on ensuring that there is a direct link and the utilization of those funds for interstates that generally require significantly more money to ensure the overall safety and sufficient capacity improvements in the movement and flow of traffic for freight and even defense corridor. So your thoughts on our encouragement of utilization of those resources for that purpose?
So big picture on the resources that we now have available. I mean, you'll recall that when we developed the 10-year plan, with input from every corner of the state, in every county, including a lot of discussion with the I-25 North Coalition, we had the funding for 4 years. We did not have the funding for 10 years. Combining the resources now available through Senate Bill 260 and the incremental allocation from the federal bill, which, just a quick parenthetical, the delta between our base allocation that we've sort of counted on for years and the funding in the federal bill is not quite as much as some of the public numbers advertised. You've probably seen a $3.7 billion number. That includes 5 years of our base budget. So that's not really new money. The new money is more on the order of magnitude of $700 to $900 million, which is a lot, but it's not. It's a different factor. So if you combine the delta on the federal package, with the amount in Senate Bill 260, it gives us enough to get the priority projects in the 10-year plan done. So, we're very committed to kind of treating all of the dollars together as we look at the statewide needs across Colorado, to make sure that we get the projects that the public and our key stakeholders have identified for so many years done first. That includes multiple segments of I-25, right? Segment 5, as I think is sort of the next on the list, along with those safety improvements that are needed on 84th to 104th. Both of those are in the 10-year plan. We have every intention of figuring out exactly what those projects look like and pushing those into the pipeline quickly. The 84th to 104th segment is a little complicated because it was built in a funny, perhaps non-ideal configuration in the first instance. It was called an interim configuration at the time, and it created a problem that needs to be fixed. That's sort of geometrically complicated. Segment 5 is, I think, more straightforward what that looks like. Both of those are, we're looking at moving ahead, in the next few years as sort of the next cohort of big projects. The 10-year plan update is not going to be focused on making a new list of projects. It's going to be focused on sort of quickly and in a way that reflects public input, grouping what the next 4 years of funded projects will look like, along with showing the out years and figuring out, hopefully we'll have resources to pull a few years into the back end so that we maintain a 10-year list. I think other interstate priorities, and, again, the authorities in SB 260 really put us on strong footing with some of these, Floyd Hill, as many of you know, and probably not as directly relevant, but you still go skiing. That's out to procurement right now. I think one of the things we're going to be looking at is trying to do the whole project at once rather than in phases, which will be more efficient. And now that the federal bill is passed, there's some possibility that we'll be able to do that, and we're looking actively at taking that to the commission. I think the fixes to the Eisenhower Tunnel, not glamorous, but with $150 million backlog in deferred maintenance. If we don't dig out of that before it becomes a problem, no one will like the implications. So but the Vail Pass project is underway. So I think there's a very strong list of priority projects along the interstates that we're moving forward in sort of groups. And now that we have stable funding, we can scope out the next cadence of how those projects get ordered in ways that, fit the work that the industry can absorb in a year's time, and also fit the public's tolerance for having construction on the interstate at once, right? We can't do them all at the same time, or we'd have very unhappy travelers.
Indeed. Well, we appreciate the opportunity to continue working with you with respect to the time frame under which we can secure the funds necessary to complete North I-25 as an essential piece. I think when we started the conversation, our desire was to see completion of that corridor and the express lane commitment by 2025 to have that identified funding and so forth. So we'll continue our work with you, and certainly there's an alignment with respect to the unfolding dialogue on the regulatory side and the outgrowth of Senate Bill 260, provisions of which included environmental components and considerations that have to be taken into account for the building of regionally significant corridors and large projects. Of course, North I-25 among the types of projects that would be have to factor other environmental concerns. And you and I have had some discussion about what that looks like for North I-25. And we as an organization have submitted and have been actively engaged in the regulatory discussions, in the written comments and public comments about concerns about the timelines, potential extended timelines, and potential increased costs with that, but a recognition of the desire and the goals that are hoped to be achieved. Our MPO has been very vocal in expressing their concerns about the mechanics and the pragmatic implications of all of that. Your thoughts on what we can expect and sort of a commitment forward on really ensuring that there isn't unnecessary delays in seeing forward movement on important capacity projects across the state as a consequence of Senate Bill 260 and the regulatory framework that's being developed.
Yeah. So there was, you'll recall that there was initially a question about whether the AQCC would undertake this rulemaking or the Transportation Commission. There were a lot of requests from the transportation community for the Transportation Commission to do it because of having a better understanding of the specifics of the discipline. That resulted, through a lot of push by us, which initially was not so popular with some folks, to shift this over to the Transportation Commission, so that it would be handled, by a group that understands the dynamics of transportation, with the benefit of staff expertise that's specific to how infrastructure works. So, I have a high level of confidence that this is being done in a way that integrates into the way that transportation planning actually works. Just a word on the methodology, it's a new concept to do this kind of a rule, but every building block within that policy is taken from a regulation that the community of practitioners sort of knows how to use, right? It's based on the model of ozone conformity, which is, quite familiar in the community of practice. The concept of the mitigations builds on a very long tried and true model that exists in the safety space and transportation. So the goal was for each of the components to build on a kind of schematic that people in the community of practice know how to work with. And, I think, knowing that people, may not love every detail, I don't think there's anything in there that's going to be so out of the, realm of the familiar that the MPO community and us can't learn how to work with it pretty quickly. And it was done that way by design. In terms of what it means for big projects, the rule is not intended to, nor do I believe that it will kind of stop or delay important big projects. Does it mean that there will be no changes? No, but I think that the things that it will do in the real world will only add options for travelers in ways that will make projects, have more components that are really beneficial. And I think we can look at that as an evolution from what's happening already, right? Folks are very familiar with the mobility hubs that are being built as part of the current I-25 North projects. When we did those at the time, they were a little piecemeal, right? We sort of added them on as components at the end. They're getting done. And actually, had we talked about it from the beginning, there could have been even more collaboration around those from the beginning. And I think we're catching up, right? You can see there's great partnership going on between Cdot staff and the developers who are working right around that area. In some cases, they're actually contributing to those because they see them as such assets for the future residents of those areas. And, what I think this rule will actually do is push those discussions to earlier in the process in a way where it kind of forces hard conversations to the table at the beginning. I think about the example of Central 70 as one where we learned a lot, right? Like, I actually think, and, for those of you who've driven through Denver, you've seen what it looks like. It is a visual improvement for the city, to say the least. But it didn't get that way through a tidy process, right? It took way too long. And, had everybody sort of forced those issues to the head in year one rather than in, decade two, you actually would have seen the project sooner. So those issues are going to come up, whether or not it's kind of forced at the beginning. And, I think that ultimately, you serve efficiency better by just kind of, kicking out all the issues, kind of forcing it to a head at the beginning and working through that stuff, at the start of a project, not, when you're in year 10 following, kind of contention that could have been managed at the beginning better. And, I think we hadn't done it before. So I-70 was a bit of a learning experience, but part of what we're trying to do in the project by project dialogue is to kind of pull all of those things that were allowed to drag on for too long and just force them to a head at the beginning of project development.
Great. I appreciate that insight. Thank you so much. And we really, again, anticipate and look forward to our continued work together on I-25 and on the full spectrum of projects across the state. We've worked closely with our colleagues in the chamber and economic development community across the state, and we'll be fully engaged with you as these new ideas for all of us sort of continue to emerge forward in the funding and spending equation. And so grateful again for your participation with us this morning in this dialogue. So thank you, Shoshana, for joining us. I want to shift. Yeah, thank you. I want to shift real quickly into sort of a moment of personal privilege for the NCLA. We're talking about transportation, and one of the key players in our efforts in North I-25 for many, many years, and a board member of ours, Carl Maxey, passed away from COVID a few weeks ago. And we want to provide him a little bit of tribute in this, particularly in this segment, because Carl was a really important player, an important voice in transportation funding. He himself is a motor carrier in that industry and has been on our NCLA board for over 30 years. He was a part of the Governor Ritter's Blue Ribbon panel on transportation, so he's been at this for a long, long time. I'm going to shift over to Laurel for a couple of comments, and then Ann Hutchison will take us from there and moving into the next panel and sharing her thoughts.
Thank you, Sandra. It is with a heavy heart that we remember Carl Maxey and his contributions and his accomplishments as a member of the NCLA board. And we'll talk a little bit more about his specific service as a member and a representative of the Fort Collins Chamber. But he served on the NCLA board for more than 20 years, and he really left us with a sense of leadership, service, and probably most memorable, a stalwart commitment to what he knew to be right. He was unshakable in his convictions, and he shared those willingly with other members of the NCLA board. So we are first and foremost grateful for his service, grateful for his life of service, and we also really appreciate this time to share his memory with you. He brought so much to NCLA, so much to our region, and whether you knew Carl or not, I can assure you that you are a beneficiary of his strong work and his commitment to this region. Ann?
Thanks, Laurel. Again, I'm Ann Hutchison, President and CEO of the Fort Collins Area Chamber, and there's no doubt that Northern Colorado lost a tremendous business advocate with the passing of Carl Maxey. The Chamber was incredibly fortunate to have had Carl as one of its key leaders the last 25 years. Carl joined the board of directors of the Fort Collins Area Chamber in 1996 and was quickly elevated to the chairman of the board in 1999. Following his service on the board, he was appointed as one of Fort Collins' representatives to the Northern Colorado Legislative Alliance, and he continued to serve on the NCLA until his passing. Carl was a thoughtful, pragmatic, fierce, and powerful advocate. And he shared those amazing skills with our Fixed North I-25 Business Alliance, being one of the very first members of that working body that is driving the expansion of North I-25. He was a tremendous human. I and Northern Colorado will miss him tremendously. We've recognized key leaders who've worked to make a difference on I-25 with a special sign, and we will be dedicating this sign to Carl's family in appreciation of his work. Thank you, Carl.